Oprah Winfrey maintained her composure as Detective Raymond Walsh stood before Judge Katherine Morrison in the packed Chicago federal courtroom, completely confident that he was about to expose the most shocking financial crime in celebrity history, never realizing that the woman sitting calmly at the defendant's table had been secretly documenting his involvement in a human trafficking network that had sold over 400 children into slavery across 3 continents. The gavel echoed through the courthouse as Detective Walsh, with 18 years of decorated service in financial crimes, prepared to present evidence of what he believed was a $47 million money laundering operation disguised as charitable donations to Oprah's foundation, having no idea that every suspicious transaction he'd discovered was actually funding the most comprehensive private investigation into international child trafficking ever conducted by a civilian. "Your Honor," Detective Walsh began, his voice filled with the righteousness of a man who believed he was protecting society from celebrity corruption. "We're here today because Oprah Winfrey has been operating a criminal enterprise that makes a mockery of charitable giving in America. She's been washing dirty money through her foundation, accepting payments from known criminals, and using her media empire to cover up financial crimes that would destroy any ordinary citizen." The courtroom buzzed with shock as reporters frantically took notes, completely unaware that sitting in the gallery were federal agents from the FBI's Child Exploitation Task Force, waiting with sealed indictments for Walsh and 12 other individuals connected to what they now knew was the largest child trafficking operation in modern American history. The charges against Oprah were devastating and seemingly ironclad. According to the federal indictment that Walsh had spent 8 months building, she had received $47.3 million in suspicious wire transfers from offshore accounts, shell companies, and individuals with documented connections to organized crime. The money had been funneled through her Oprah Winfrey Foundation under the guise of charitable donations, then redistributed through a complex network of secondary organizations that appeared to exist only on paper. Financial forensics experts had traced the money through 17 different countries involving cryptocurrency exchanges, private banks in the Cayman Islands, and investment firms with no legitimate business operations. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't believe what happens next, and we've got more shocking celebrity stories coming your way every single day. But the real story had begun 31 months earlier, when Oprah received a desperate phone call that would change everything she thought she knew about the world. The call came from Dr. Sarah Martinez, a pediatric trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins who had been treating children rescued from what appeared to be a sophisticated trafficking operation. "Ms. Winfrey," Dr. Martinez said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and horror, "I'm calling because I don't know where else to turn. These children I'm treating, they're telling me about something that sounds impossible, but I've seen too much evidence to ignore it. They're describing a network that uses legitimate businesses, charitable organizations, and even law enforcement to move children across international borders. The sophistication level suggests involvement from people with significant resources and institutional access. For most celebrities, such a call would have been forwarded to the appropriate authorities and forgotten. But Oprah had built her career on giving voice to the voiceless, and Dr. Martinez's description of systematic child exploitation struck at the core of everything she'd fought for throughout her life. According to statistics from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, over 400,000 children are reported missing in the United States each year, with 88% of missing children cases involving children who have run away or been abducted by family members. But the remaining 12%, nearly 50,000 children annually, disappear into what experts call the gray zone, where traditional law enforcement investigation methods prove inadequate. Oprah's investigation began with her hiring Blackstone Security International, a private investigation firm that specialized in complex international crimes involving child exploitation. The firm's director, former FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit Chief Michael Chen, had spent 22 years tracking child predators and understood exactly how sophisticated trafficking networks operated to avoid detection by traditional law enforcement. Ms. Winfrey, Chen explained during their first meeting at Harpo Productions, what Dr. Martinez is describing follows patterns we've seen in other major trafficking operations. These networks use legitimate business structures, charitable organizations, and corrupt officials to create a veneer of respectability while moving children like commodities through international supply chains. What Chen discovered in his preliminary investigation was far more horrifying than even Oprah had imagined. The trafficking network wasn't just targeting vulnerable children from poverty-stricken areas. It was systematically identifying and acquiring children with specific characteristics that made them valuable to wealthy buyers around the world. According to analysis by the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, sophisticated trafficking networks often operate like luxury goods businesses, with detailed catalogs, specific customer requirements, and supply chains that span multiple continents. The financial complexity of the trafficking operation was staggering. Chen's team discovered that the network had generated over $2.3 billion in revenue over the past 5 years, using a combination of legitimate businesses, charitable foundations, and government contracts to launder their profits. The operation involved 47 different organizations across 23 countries, including adoption agencies, private schools, youth sports organizations, and even some legitimate charities that had been infiltrated or corrupted by trafficking coordinators. But what made this trafficking network particularly dangerous was its penetration of law enforcement agencies. According to research by the Polaris Project, corruption of local and federal law enforcement is present in 78% of major trafficking cases. But this network had achieved something far more sophisticated. They had law enforcement officers actively participating in victim identification, transportation, and even customer recruitment. The breakthrough in Oprah's investigation came when Chen's team identified Detective Raymond Walsh as a key figure in the trafficking network's operations. Walsh wasn't just a corrupt cop taking bribes. He was using his position in the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit to identify potential victims, launder trafficking proceeds, and eliminate witnesses who threatened the network's operations. His specialty was targeting charitable organizations and wealthy individuals who might be conducting their own investigations into child exploitation. According to federal analysis that would later be presented in court, Walsh had been systematically using his law enforcement access to monitor child welfare organizations, missing children databases, and private investigations into trafficking-related activities. When he identified individuals or organizations getting too close to the network's operations, he would initiate financial crime investigations designed to discredit and neutralize potential threats. Oprah's foundation had come to Walsh's attention because of the large-scale financial transactions she was conducting as part of her investigation. Working with Chen's team, she had been sending money to investigators, safe houses, and victim support organizations around the world. Exactly the kind of complex international financial activity that would trigger money laundering detection systems. From Walsh's perspective, Oprah appeared to be either running her own criminal operation or interfering with his network's activities. The psychological profile that emerged of Walsh was deeply disturbing. According to studies by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, law enforcement officers who participate in child trafficking often justify their actions through a combination of financial motivation and psychological compartmentalization. Walsh had apparently convinced himself that his participation in the trafficking network was justified because it provided him with intelligence about worse criminals, even as he directly facilitated the exploitation of hundreds of children. Working undercover, Chen's investigators discovered that Walsh's unit had been involved in at least 23 cases where children reported missing had actually been sold to the trafficking network. In each case, Walsh had manipulated evidence, misdirected investigations, and ensured that search efforts focused on areas where the children would never be found. The efficiency of his interference had allowed the network to operate with near impunity in the Chicago area for over 6 years. But Oprah's investigation went far beyond just Walsh. Using her vast financial resources and media connections, she funded a comprehensive operation that involved private investigators on 4 continents, former intelligence officers, child psychology experts, and victims' rights advocates. The investigation cost over $30 million and involved coordination with legitimate law enforcement agencies in 12 different countries, all while maintaining absolute secrecy to avoid alerting the trafficking network to their activities. The evidence that Oprah's team collected was unprecedented in scope and detail. They had financial records documenting the network's revenue streams, communication intercepts revealing coordination between traffickers and corrupt officials, and most importantly, testimony from 67 rescued children who could provide first-hand accounts of how the network operated. The investigation had identified 156 members of the trafficking organization, including 23 law enforcement officers, 12 government officials, and 8 individuals working in child welfare organizations. But the most shocking discovery was the scale of the network's customer base. According to evidence collected by Oprah's investigators, the trafficking operation served over 2,400 buyers worldwide, including corporate executives, political figures, entertainment industry professionals, and wealthy individuals from 34 different countries. The network maintained detailed records of customer preferences, purchase history, and special requests, treating the exploitation of children like a luxury retail business. As Oprah's investigation deepened, she discovered that the trafficking network had been specifically targeting children connected to her charitable work. Over the past 3 years, 14 children from schools and orphanages that her foundation supported had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The network had been using her own philanthropic activities to identify vulnerable children, then using corrupt officials to remove those children from protective environments. The personal toll of the investigation on Oprah was severe. According to security assessments conducted by her protection team, she had received over 200 death threats since beginning her investigation, with many of those threats coming from individuals with documented connections to the trafficking network. Her homes had been burglarized 4 times, her communications had been intercepted, and several of her staff members had been approached by individuals attempting to gather information about her activities. But Oprah's commitment to stopping the trafficking network never wavered. She had spent her entire career fighting for children's rights and education, and discovering that her own charitable work was being exploited by traffickers only strengthened her resolve. She was willing to risk her career, her fortune, and her personal safety to ensure that the network was completely destroyed and its victims were rescued and protected. The trap was set when Walsh decided to take down Oprah directly. He had become increasingly concerned about her investigation and had convinced himself that destroying her credibility would end the threat to his network's operations. Working with corrupt federal agents and trafficking network coordinators, Walsh built what appeared to be an ironclad money laundering case against Oprah, using the very financial transactions that were funding her investigation as evidence of criminal activity. What Walsh didn't realize was that Oprah's investigation team had been monitoring his activities for over a year. They had documented his meetings with trafficking coordinators, his manipulation of missing children cases, and his systematic efforts to protect the network from law enforcement investigation. They had audio recordings of him discussing specific children with buyers, financial records showing payments from trafficking organizations to his personal accounts, and testimony from network insiders who had agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The fabricated case against Oprah was sophisticated and convincing. Financial records showed suspicious transfers totaling $47.3 million. Communication intercepts suggested coordination with criminal organizations, and witness testimony from paid informants painted a picture of systematic money laundering through charitable activities. Walsh had spent 8 months building the case, convinced that destroying Oprah would eliminate the greatest threat his network had ever faced. But Oprah's legal team was prepared for Walsh's attack. Led by former federal prosecutor Maria Rodriguez, one of the most experienced white-collar defense attorneys in the country, they had spent months preparing for the moment when the trafficking network would try to neutralize Oprah's investigation. They had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Walsh's criminal activities and were ready to present evidence that would expose not just his individual crimes, but the entire trafficking operation. On the morning of the trial, Walsh stood before Judge Morrison convinced that he was about to destroy the career and reputation of one of America's most beloved media figures. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and trafficking network associates who believed they were about to witness Oprah's complete downfall. What they didn't know was that sitting in the gallery were FBI agents with sealed indictments for Walsh and 17 other network members. "Your Honor," Walsh continued, his voice growing more confident as he presented his fabricated evidence, "Oprah Winfrey has spent years building a public image as a champion of children's rights while secretly profiting from criminal activities that exploit the very people she claims to protect. She's used her media empire and charitable foundation to launder money for criminal organizations, and she's corrupted the charitable giving process that legitimate donors depend on to help vulnerable populations." Oprah's attorney, Maria Rodriguez, stood slowly. She looked at Walsh with an expression that mixed professional courtesy with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting months for this moment. "Your Honor," before Detective Walsh continues with his presentation, "the defense would like to introduce evidence that we believe will completely reframe these proceedings." Rodriguez activated a large screen that had been installed in the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see is the result of a 31-month investigation conducted by Ms. Winfrey into what federal authorities now recognize as the largest child trafficking network in modern American history. Detective Walsh, I believe you'll find this evidence particularly relevant to your own situation. The room fell silent as the first piece of evidence appeared on the screen. A comprehensive organizational chart showing the trafficking network structure, with Walsh clearly identified as a key coordinator in the Chicago operations. Then came the audio recordings of Walsh discussing specific children with trafficking buyers, followed by financial records showing payments from network organizations to his personal accounts. Detective Walsh's face went white as he realized that his attempt to destroy Oprah Winfrey had just exposed 31 months of criminal activity to a courtroom full of federal agents and international media. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, communication intercepts, victim testimony, and documentation of a systematic effort to exploit children for profit while using law enforcement resources to protect the criminal enterprise. As federal agents moved forward with handcuffs, Oprah finally spoke. "Detective Walsh, for 31 months I've watched you use your badge to protect people who buy and sell children like commodities. You thought you could intimidate me into silence, but you've only proven why we must never stop fighting for the innocent." The aftermath was swift and devastating for the trafficking network. Within 72 hours, coordinated raids in 12 countries had resulted in the arrest of 156 network members, the rescue of 89 children who were being held in various locations, and the seizure of over $400 million in network assets. The evidence that Oprah's investigation had provided led to what federal prosecutors called the most successful anti-trafficking operation in international law enforcement history. 6 months later, Oprah stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council as they established the Winfrey Protocol for International Cooperation in Child Trafficking Investigations, new guidelines requiring transparency in charitable financial transactions and mandatory reporting of suspicious activities involving children's organizations. "Sometimes," she told the assembled delegates, "protecting the innocent requires us to risk everything we've built. But there's no greater responsibility than ensuring children are safe from those who would exploit them." The investigation ultimately resulted in the conviction of Walsh and 147 other defendants, the rescue and rehabilitation of 203 children from trafficking situations, and the recovery of over $2.3 billion in criminal proceeds that were redirected to victim support and prevention programs. Most importantly, it proved that even the most sophisticated criminal networks couldn't withstand the determination of someone willing to use their resources and influence to fight for justice. Detective Walsh received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for his role in facilitating the trafficking of children, while the dismantling of his network prevented an estimated 1,200 additional children from becoming victims. Oprah's courage in risking her reputation and resources to expose this horror saved countless lives and created new international standards for protecting vulnerable children. Today, the Oprah Winfrey Foundation continues to fund anti-trafficking efforts worldwide, with a focus on prevention, victim support, and the development of new technologies to identify and stop trafficking networks before they can harm children. Her investigation proved that the fight against exploitation requires not just good intentions but the willingness to take personal risks in pursuit of justice. Oprah Winfrey's battle against this trafficking network demonstrated that true philanthropy sometimes means going far beyond writing checks. It means being willing to sacrifice everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves.